We're going to have a sound piece playing now, so if everybody can please just close your eyes and be quiet and enjoy.
So before I start to introduce my symposium concept, I'd like to thank Alice Gulon, who will also be in our panel, for allowing us to show this amazing piece. And just a short story before we started today. So Alice asked me if we wanted to give some brief information about the art piece. And I said no, because the reason that I put it before the symposium starts is because I wanted to give an embodied reference before we go into this verbal discussion about the topic, affect and climate change. I think this is the great piece that really connects, the audiences about how we are just part of Earth. And it's not something grand. It's just there in you, and you can feel it. And then thank Mu Chun for the introduction before, and also I'd like to thank Yuan for making this happen and then nominate me. So my name is Lin Zhang, and I'm the curator and moderator of today's first symposium. The symposium is called Reimagine Renaissance as a Contemporary Condition. I'd like to make an intro by beginning with one of my favorite Renaissance paintings, Adam and Eve by Lucas Cranach the Elder, painted in 1526 and now in the court gallery listed on the left. The painting depicts the familiar biblical story of Eve tasting the fruit from the tree of knowledge. So art historians have interpreted this work in many different ways. My own reading is perhaps a little bit different. So for me, the tasting the fruit represents a desire to move beyond the boundaries of what is already known. It is an act of curiosity, an act of crossing thresholds. The snake, often understood as a symbol of temptation, can also be read as a symbol of transformation, a force that disrupts certainty and opens the possibility of becoming something else. I'm not trying to reject established interpretations of the painting. Rather, I want to ask a simple question. Can a work of art have only one meaning? And if we can accept that single painting can generate multiple readings, perhaps we should also ask the same question about how we understand the world, how we see space and time. Do we really have only one perspective from which to understand the past, the present, and the future, even within the same period, city, and event? Countless experiences exist on multiple levels and dimensions. Thank you. Yet many of them remain invisible to us. Some were excluded through political power, some through cultural hierarchies, and others simply because they did not fit dominant narratives of knowledge. When we think about Renaissance, we often think first about art. We think about paintings, sculptures, architectures, and extraordinary cultural achievements. But Renaissance was never only about art. It was also a period of technological development, scientific discoveries, political transformation, and economic reorganization. Different ways of thinking, making, and imagining emerged simultaneously and became entangled. This raises another question. What drives these transformations? What is the force that pushes individuals and societies beyond existing boundaries of knowledge and experiences? Today, I would like to offer a perspective that begins from affect. Rather than focusing solely on what people know, affect draws our attention to the desires, anticipations, curiosities, and energies that move through individuals and the collective before becoming fully formed ideas or actions. In a recent essay from Artifact Journal, Mu Chun described and called this force as the impulse. I find this idea particularly compelling and resonating. An impulse is not yet a program, a theory, or a political project. It is the initial movement towards something unknown, the urge to explore, to experiment, to question, to imagine otherwise. Perhaps what embodied the Renaissance were impulses, hundreds and thousands of them, the impulse to travel, to observe, to invent, to challenge inherited truths, and to imagine different worlds. While conducting one of my research in Florence last year, I often found myself thinking about this. The Renaissance was not only experienced as a historical period, but those who lived through it. It was a moment of uncertainty. Existing knowledge structures were being challenged, new technologies were emerging, the world was becoming larger, but also smaller, more connected, but also more disconnected at the same time, and more difficult to understand. In many ways, our contemporary moment feels similar. We are living through rapid technological changes and ecological uncertainties, geopolitical tensions, and profound questions about what it means to be human in an increasingly interconnected world. Artificial intelligence is reshaping creativity and labor. Climate change is transforming our relationship with the planet. Established political and economic systems are being questioned across different societies. Therefore, this symposium, the Renaissance, is not just a historical moment. It is a condition and a space where we navigate in a world that the future feels both open and uncertain. As a curator, I want this symposium to explore possibilities to the question I have as a cultural geographer in becoming. What kinds of impulses emerge when certainty begins to dissolve, and how and where and what they do? These questions brings us directly to today's symposium. And I really want to thank my PhD supervisors, Professor Ben Anderson, and Professor Anna Sickle, to be here today to support me. But the support did not just start now. It started from 2023 when I emailed them online, because my mom asked me how I met you. And I said, I found them online and I emailed them. That's how we meet people today. So now please welcome Professor Ben Anderson, whose work has been central to the study of affect, atmospheres, anticipation, and hope, to give us a brief introduction about affect.
Thank you, Lynn, for that typically generous introduction, and thank you for the welcome, and it's lovely to be part of this community. How to introduce a term, a word, a concept, affect, that has been subject to a kind of bewildering but exciting proliferation of meanings over the last 20 years or so. To do so, I'd like to invite you to return back to the moment when we were invited, or more precisely, instructed to close our eyes before we received and encountered the artwork earlier. In that moment of invitation, in that moment of instruction, what passed through our bodies? How did we first receive it? Did we receive it with a sense of anticipation that something surprising, something different might be about to happen in this space? Did we encounter that moment through apprehension, as the lights went down and we wondered what might be to come? Did we meet and greet that moment with a certain indifference, still waiting for something to happen? All of these are what I term affects. All of these are ways in which our existence, our ways of being with one another are shrouded, are animated by intensities of one form or another. Sometimes those intensities have names, and of course those names vary cross-culturally. Note how I've used some of the names that I'm familiar with. Kind of excitement, exhilaration perhaps. But some of those names, some of those affects, we don't necessarily have names for. A sense of possibility, kind of like a feeling of aliveness, a moment of diminution, as we begin to feel nothing in a situation. And of course, those affects that we feel in any and all situations are never wholly our own. They're never something that we possess and we produce. They're produced in relation to the world that we inhabit. They're produced in relation to the lights as they go down. They're produced in relation to the words as they animate and excite us, as they energize us or not. They're produced in relation to how the person next to us is sitting. Are they sitting calmly and still? Are they fidgeting? All of this folds into the affects that course through life. And of course, the affects that animate us are not only of the present situation or the present moment. There was a moment while I was listening to the artwork where a certain rhythm reminded me of a song, Voodoo Ray, that I used to love dancing euphorically to in the mid-1990s in Manchester. And I was transformed and kind of returned to a previous moment. In other words, a past folded into the present as kind of I felt in that moment. Perhaps it was the same for many of you. And affects, just as they are not only our own, they're formed in relation. They don't only happen on the scale of us as individuals. They also happen at the scale of this room. Think about how this room has something like an atmosphere that we all share, that we all feel. Perhaps an atmosphere of welcome and excitement, as we heard earlier. Perhaps other kind of atmospheres. But of course, affects don't only happen at the scale of a room or a site where we're all co-present with one another. Think about how an event or a condition like climate change is partly constituted through what we could think of as global flows of feeling, about how something like urgency or something like a sense of impending doom might serve as a kind of transnational affect that has animated a whole kind of climate politics. Think also, though, of how other kind of flows of affect constitute our global world today. The hype that surrounds generative AI, for example. So affects, this feeling of existence, the intensity of life, are never only our own. They're never only forged in the present moment. They happen, they take place at different scales simultaneously. And importantly, there is no aspect, there is no dimension of life which isn't in some way or another affective. But of course, affects are not idiosyncratic. They're organized, they're produced in all kinds of ways. Think about how different societies have occasions, kind of rituals of intensity. Here, a typical scene from a UK football match, a scene of exhilaration, a scene of shared feeling with one another. A scene, though, also of difference. Note the figure in the middle, doing something with his phone. Affects are never necessarily coherent. They're always riven by differences, even when the same thing appears to be felt together. It never totally is. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you. Oh, you know what I totally forgot to mention, which Liz said today. This analysis of affects is set out in a book that myself and my dear friend Anna Sakor, who you'll hear from later, wrote. And our argument in this book is that without an understanding of affects, we cannot understand our political condition, including events like climate change. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello again. Here, let me introduce you other panel speakers, Alice Gülen. You have just known her through her work. And Mete Kutlu. He's a Paris-based Turkish artist. but also an architect. Today we're going to talk about hope, utopian, climate change, and technology. I'd like to start by asking everyone to share your relationship with hope and utopian and climate change a little bit, with maybe 2 or 3 sentences. Would you like to start, Alice?
Sure.
We just had your work.
Of course. First of all, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you, Lynn, for this invitation. I'm really happy to be here. So the sound piece you heard earlier is called Waves of Resonance, and it's a work that includes marine sound recordings from the North Sea and the Arctic, more specifically in Svalbard as well, a place that is rapidly melting. Some of the sounds that you heard in the sound piece that were kind of like clicky sounds, like clack, clack, clack. Those are the sounds of melting icebergs that I recorded there during residency expedition in 2023. And while I was recording those sounds, I had a very intimate perspective with the ice. I was close to the ice. I was wearing waders going down into the water. And listening to that sound is simultaneously a gift because I got to be there, but also realizing that this is the sound of deep time evaporating into the atmosphere. So for me, that's also witnessing a loss of memory as well. So you asked about, hope. And I think for me, I'd like to bring into the conversation of grief as well, which I perceive as codependent in the times that we're living today. So I'll leave it at that for now. But yeah, thank you.
No, it's Ben. It's you. We're showing a quote from you from your writing about hope from 20 years ago, where you also reference Bloch. And it's here.
Lynn, you're making me feel old 20 years ago. So what is my relation with climate change? I'm interested in the question of the improper ways in which certain populations, certain publics feel in relation to climate change. So I'm interested in trying to understand why people are not necessarily feeling kind of anxious and not necessarily feeling panic. In other words, not necessarily feeling what you might presume people should be feeling in the context of the claims that are correctly and rightly made about the scale of challenge with climate change. So what I'm interested in is understanding a whole range of different kind of feelings around climate change, from climate change boredom, feeling indifferent in relation to climate change, through to some of the kind of rage that today in a society like ours surrounds kind of net zero. And so basically I'm interested in the sort of complexity and kind of like paradoxes of how a society feels around climate change, and how we can kind of learn about kind of like what people's conditions are there, and how we can basically learn to present climate change to people differently in the context of that. And so in that context, what do I think hope is? I mean, hope is important for me for 2 reasons. Number one, we're sort of animated by visions of a catastrophic or kind of apocalyptic future so often. So I think hope for me is partly about producing different senses and visions of the future for people to grasp and hold on to. But for me, hope is actually much more importantly about a break with the present. Hope we think is about the future. For me, it's not. It's about a different hopefulness makes to how the here and now feels to people. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about utopian materialism? Because I was being asked if we could talk about materialism when Mucha interviewed me.
I thank you, Lynn, because I have a habit in my work of inventing concepts and then just seeing what happens with them. And this was a concept where not a lot happened with it. So 20 years later, it's back being discussed in the room. Okay, what was I kind of interested in that? And I don't want to take up too much time here, so I'm going to be quick. I'm interested in how the world is never closed. There are always tendencies, there are always latencies which keep the world open as it develops. So often in how we talk about the futures to come, we can kind of presume a kind of closedness of the world. We can presume a kind of determination. We can presume that certain tendencies are inevitable and nothing can be done about them. So what I wanted to try and do is kind of think, okay, what if you take the reality of hope seriously? And here I was incredibly influenced by the Marxist process philosopher Ernst Bloch. Ernst Bloch's work is kind of like incredible because he says hope is not scarce. Hope is not rare. Hope is almost everywhere. Think about the hope that drew you to this room today, to sit here. The hope of being interested, I don't know. The hope of making connections, I don't know. It doesn't matter what those hopes are, but hope is something that is kind of like abundant. There's kind of like a plenitude of hope. So I was kind of interested in, okay, how do you ground that claim in an account of the world's openness? Because of course, this is what hope teaches us, that the future is uncertain, and that's something which gives us possibility.
Thank you. I really like this. And to reference your word, hope is a space that is not closed, and it's this about this openness. Mette always talk about himself as an open source. What is your relationship to hope? How does that connect to you and your work?
Okay, is this working?
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe we can see the next image. Yeah. So I think I interpret these clouds as kind of a representation of a prototype of an affect atmosphere. Because I realized you always talk about these notions and interests through atmosphere, this ambiguity, this openness, this uncertainty of the fluid dynamics. And I think it was really wonderful to open with Elise's aquatic work, because for me, for years I worked on the British Library archives. So for me, it's it's a nice experience to be here finally. And the manuscripts for me here represents the age of enlightenment. We are in the temple of linear knowledge, of encyclopedias, taxonomy, categorization. And here we are talking about waters, ocean, atmosphere. So and I think we are entering a society, we are starting a society of fluids, much more dynamic and complex than a society of solids. So, and in these clouds I chased for the past 6 years, from China to Constantinople, and even I found some in the secret archives of the Vatican. And they do not represent just clouds. As you can see, they are very different than the clouds that we see in Western painting. It's not the visual appearance, but it's the principle of turbulence that is represented here. So it's the fundamental principle of fluid dynamics, which was already observed, of course, by then. And why this matters? These paintings were highly influenced by Sufi ideals, so mystical cosmologies. And of course, this is borrowed from Chinese arts. And here they represent the collapse of the grid, the collapse of the modernity, and a much more open and fluid vision of the world. As far as, for the openness, the spiral is a particular figure, of course. The inside becomes the outside. The center becomes the perimeter. So it abolishes all hierarchies. It is the ultimate symbol for me of openness and this network connected vision.
Thank you so much. We need to go to the next page.
Okay.
So here is also a presentation and image from you.
Yeah. So this is actually the essence of my research. I interpret civilization as a language. And let's imagine that we are writing a civilization. So we need to write it, we need a grammar, and we need a vocabulary. So what you're seeing, the spiral here, for me, represents, it's a timeline. So usually we imagine a timeline being linear from high school and stuff. But here, as the title of the symposium indicates, we are talking about maybe a non-linear vision of history, a much more turbulent one, a kind of worldview which keeps folding onto itself. So in my research, I suggest that we are entering this new cloud age. And let me look at this diagram. On one side, we have geometry. And this was the prism through which we have been building our civilization for the past 500 years, since the Italian Renaissance. Geometry meaning Greek for earth, and metri for measure of the earth, which became the principle of our civilization. But I think that today meteorology is becoming the dominant idea. So we learned complexity, the idea of complexity from our atmosphere. Edward Lorenz, when he saw in the atmosphere that actually nothing is chaotic, nothing is disorderly, even though these figures of the atmosphere appear amorphous and complex, they have an inherent order to them. And can we not play it?
Can we play this piece?
So in that sense, I think today, when we talk about knowledge and effects, we are rather more talking about atmospheres, meteorology, rather than solids, geometry, measures. And yeah.
This is my research. This is Ben's research as well. And this is also the ocean, like when all the rigid becomes the fluid.
Exactly, yeah. So here, it only played once, unfortunately. But on one side, we're looking at an Ottoman miniature painting from the 16th century. It's a representation of a city. And on the other side, we're seeing a cloud simulation. In the next part of the symposium, I'll talk more about this, but how particle simulations and fluid dynamics are becoming the symbol of our age today, the symbol of the algorithmic society.
Sorry, Matt, I have to stop you. So the question comes to why affects matter to climate change. I think 3 of my panel speakers, they have already offered their views, but I'd like to have Ben to talk a little bit more about this.
I'm sort of wondering whether you'd like to talk about it.
Yes, she will.
Thanks.
Because this is actually an image from Alice's film that I'm showing in our upcoming exhibition, Echoes of Hope. And this work is called Eventual Horizon. But I want Ben to talk about why affects matter to climate change from the academic perspective.
Yeah, I mean, climate change basically presents people with a problem of experience, because you effectively have a sort of dichotomy between any specific event or situation which can be attributed to climate change. For example, like weather might feel weird, or there might be a particular kind of intense kind of like weather event, which then gets attributed to climate change. But climate change kind of like as kind of like global event condition cannot necessarily be experienced as such, or kind of like in itself. You only ever experience kind of like traces, fragments of climate change. So that kind of almost kind of like challenge of experience makes kind of like affects incredibly important. Because, and it makes affects incredibly important because climate change as such can never be experienced in itself. What you always experience are different kind of like climate change affects. So a feeling of apprehension, vague unease about the future, kind of like a feeling of anticipatory grief for the loss that might come, a feeling of kind of like anger, a feeling of indifference. There's all kinds of affects which essentially mediate what climate change is for people. So that, for me, is why affects matter to climate change. There is no experience of climate change which isn't in some ways affective. And this is why I think artistic work is so important for kind of intervening in how climate change comes to be experienced, for kind of multiplying out the possibilities for experiencing climate change differently, for making climate change present in new ways. Like, all of these, for me, are kind of absolutely necessary interventions in the midst of global crisis.
Thank you, Ben. And so this work is a shoot from Alice's film, Eventual Horizon, where she produced this film work about to connect climate change, environmental degradation with grief, and then the experiences of the loss that we experience. Alice, would you like to give a little bit more about the concept of the work?
Sure. So yeah, as Lynn said, the image you're seeing, it's an exhibition view of that film called Eventual Horizon, which was filmed in the Arctic, in the Svalbard region, and it expresses the parallel between the experience of grief of a loved one and ecological degradation. What I want to bring closely to here is that grief is not just sadness. It is not something just very difficult. It is, of course, as well. I mentioned earlier the codependency of grief being, that's the sound piece you heard too earlier. We can talk about that after. But that grief and hope are codependent. And I mean that by the way that when we are grieving, it's a way of saying goodbye, but it's also recognizing the life that has been, but also the life that persists and still is there, even in times of uncertainty. And for me, this is where the hope comes into as well. I also want to refer, like Mette, you spoke about fluidity earlier, and I want to bring across the word porosity, which for me is really important today. Of course, my work talks a lot about water in many different ways in the ocean, but it's also very much about the body, and that relates to affect as well, and how art, but also, you know, art in the largest sense, different mediums, can speak to the body and say things that are sometimes not perceptible within words or theoretically. So for me, that's the exploration of other forms of intelligence in some ways of communication, but also understanding human sensitivity as well today. And so now I want to refer back to the sound piece which you listened at the beginning, Waves of Resonance, which is an artwork that includes recordings from different marine environments, but it's also based on scientific research done in collaboration with Marine Séverin, who's an environmental psychologist. And what we've done is use this sound piece to understand the psychological impact of listening to this work. So understand it, like we know that art can raise awareness in certain ways, but what does it actually do? Like, what is the impact? What is the affect in terms of perhaps behavioral change? So using this sound work, we've done research workshops. Cut me if I'm going too long, so let me know. But yeah, research workshops, and I think it's important to tell you a bit more about the work behind just the listening experience. And what we've found so far is that people who have listened to the sound piece in its entire duration is that it's reducing stress and negative mood and creating a strong connection to the ocean. And now we're looking at the more long-term impact. So when we gave these workshops, we would also share pro-environmental attitudes and actions that people could take part of, not only on an international level, but also locally, so taking part in different organizations, but also actions they could do in their day-to-day. And so now we're looking at that. And another element we're developing as well, because the work is very much to do with ocean and human health as well in terms of reduction of stress, is we're looking into developing the research in more clinical settings as well. So it's really about understanding, I think, Lynn, you referred to in your introduction, what does it mean to be human today as well? Like, how do we feel? What makes us feel? And what does that do too?
Thank you, Alice. I remember the first time I encountered your work, Sound of Resonance, which was last year during Freeze. Like, she had a show in far North London. So far, no one wanted to go, and I went. It's because it is a lot of effort, because everyone was interested in Regent's Park. Everyone was in Regent's Park. And I went, I went with Chema, she's somewhere here, my best friend. We were there, and I said, you know what, why there isn't a sofa or like a bench, like I just wanted to sleep here. And then I feel so happy that we could show this work today here. And I think we wanted to talk more, but because of time limit, we would really need to move to the next panel. But before we go, I really want to refer to like how affects, relate to climate change. If we think about Alice's work, what we just experienced, like the sound, the water, the melting senses, the transformation of the ice into something else, the rising sea level, it's part of bodily experiences. And climate change, it exists on multiple levels, all levels. So to understand this concept about all levels, let's move to the next panel. Let's welcome to Professor Anna Seco to join us. And thank you, Ben. And thank you, Alice. Just another extra information about the work we just discussed, Eventual Horizon. It will be on show at the Turner Contemporary in Margate from the 20th of June. So it's a show that's coming up, so please go to see it. Hello, Anna.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me here. Is it working?
Is it working? Okay, great. So shall we start with your little stories?
Yes.
And we can...
I am going to tell a story. Should I take the clicker?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to tell you a story. It's a little intimation of a bigger project that I'm doing on the space-time unconscious. That is the idea that of a post-human unconscious that we can understand as a twist or rupture that haunts matter, space, and time from within, at once unmaking the human subject and making it and the world. So today I'm going to do some topological experimentation. To tell you a kind of story. So in a recent paper on topology for geography, Siddhartha Unitan Kumar and his colleagues wrote, "Strange though it may seem, to take topology seriously is to find the figure of the knower in what is known. To see one's own subjectivity emanating back from the diagrams whose ink is still drying on the page, to consider that, as the human does topology, so too does topology do the human." So this connects to questions of what the human is and to what knowledge is. And what Kumar and his colleagues are saying basically reflects the Bohrian insight, which is so important to quantum physics, that there is a constitutive role of the observer in what is observed. But to extend this into a relational ontology, so too does the human become emergent in these practices, in this relationship. Okay, so strange. But what if it is stranger still? What if the face that emanates from the topological diagram is uncanny, familiar, but alien? What if what looks back at us is human, but also inhuman? What if the knower doesn't know what they know, cannot know what they know? What if some knowledge is unconscious? What if the knower is also an unknower? And if this unknown returns our gaze, does it not unnerve us? Does it not infuse the topological diagram with anxiety? What happens then when topology undoes the human? So today I'm going to tell you a little story I've picked an artifact, stairs, a technological and artistic artifact. And my premise is that through this ordinary element of the built environment, as it becomes less solidly human, indeed less solid, the staircase can come to manifest the topological disturbances of space and time that produce the human as a figment of their world. So in truth, I started thinking about stairs after I encountered an entry in Kafka's diary from 1911. The entry is but one paragraph, and it reads in main, "The sight of stairs moves me so much today. Early in the morning and several times since, I've taken pleasure in the triangular section visible from my window of the stone railing of the staircase that leads down on the right to the quay plateau, very inclined, as if it were giving only a quick hint. And now I see on the other side of the river a ladder on the slope leading to the water. It was always there, but is revealed only in autumn and winter." A simple description, a quick hint of stairs, the revelation of a ladder, but I was confounded. Why was Kafka so moved by the sight of stairs, the mystery of affect? What feelings did the steps down to the quay stir in him on that autumn day? What would it take to be so affected by stairs? I started staring at stairs from my window in autumn. Nothing. I left my room and followed them, up and down, sometimes both at once, not knowing where I was headed, whether to my own imprisonment, my imaginary prison, or the realm of angels. Nonetheless, I persisted, walking up only to go down. Oh, I think I'm maybe one slide behind. Yeah, there we go. Nonetheless, I persisted, walking up only to go down, walking up and down, sometimes both at once, not knowing where I was headed. I was only ever to perceive a partial view, up or down, while at the same time, the impossible, up and down, continued to emerge. At one point, I most certainly metamorphosized, discovered myself to be an insect, maybe an ant, or possibly a cockroach. Despite, or perhaps because of the inhumanity of my predicament, I then found myself considering how human stairs are. Thank you. That one's not working. Okay. How human stairs are. John Templer's 2-volume treatment of the history, theory, and dangers of the staircase opens by noting that, quote, "The fundamental prosthetic nature of stairs encourages their conceptual longevity as well as constant rebirth and replication. The quintessential geometry of the stair is prehistoric. Its components are, in Templer's words, circumscribed by the boundaries imposed by human physical dimensions and gait." The second volume of the staircase is centrally concerned with safety, that is, with falling. But John Templer, the architectural historian, does not consider what happens if you fall on the continuous staircase. Do you fall up or down? Or do you fall through? As when climbing a staircase in the dark and you don't know when the last step is coming. As Nabokov writes in Speak Memory, quote, "Then, with a momentary sense of exquisite panic, with a wild contraction of muscles, one sinks into the phantasm of a step, padded, as it were, with the infinitely elastic stuff of its own non-existence." But it is not just that stairs are ghostly, there are ghosts on stairs. On the one side of this image, you see the Doubt staircase by artist Karsten Höller, installed in the 18th century Palazzo Diego in Venice. The treads are placed at 5-degree angles, quote, "with the aim of creating a feeling of slight unease in the user," the website confesses. Perhaps it is not so difficult to make us uneasy on the stairs, the hint of a passageway, the ghost on the stairs, Falling through stairs, the human and its prosthetic dissolve into an apparition, a wispy intimation of the indeterminacy of states and spaces and the nonlinearity of time. Finally, designed for the bipedal, scaled to a human stride, matched to human aims, haunted by human doubt and non-existence, stairs are not for a beetle, being unnecessary for anyone with sticky feet. And yet, there I was, scampering endlessly, as though these replicating staircases implicated a tarsus as much as the human foot. Then it dawned on me. This impossible object that spun me inside and out, that at once animated and dissolved me, was a molecular staircase, none other than the double helix structure of DNA. Behold, a planetary miracle, the universal of cellular life on Earth. Moved by the realization that the uncanny circuit that split and reversed me, damned and holy, human and non-human, phantom and doubter, was the genesis of all my living possibilities and impossibilities. I sat down, I opened my journal and wrote, "The sight of stairs moves me so much today."
Thank you, Anna, for your lovely story. So I was putting up this panel. So Anna and Mette, they just met yesterday. But before that, for me, they already met through their work, but they don't know each other. But their work knows each other. And then when they were sending me their slides, I was so surprised, but not surprised. They used the same image, So let's talk about your perspective from the other side of the staircase.
Yeah, it is literally the other part of the staircase. Because on the left here, or right here, you're seeing the famous Vitruvian Man by Da Vinci, the iconic symbol of the Italian Renaissance. And on the other side, I discovered this other cosmogram in the archives of Paris. It represents the same human figure, more or less, a bit more chubby, but it represents a fundamentally different worldview. On one side, we represent the human through its body, appearance, visual aspect of it, its corporeality. On the other side, we are looking at a diagram showing a code-based understanding of the universe and of the human. So I call it the matrix human, where it is not the form, but the information that connects human and the universe. So for the past 6 years, I spent some time understanding the art of that other Renaissance, the Renaissance of the Silk Road in the 15th century. And I made a few little discoveries, findings. I want to start actually with this one, talking about stairs and spirals and quantum entanglement. Anna talks about the space-time unconscious and how things can get entangled across time, across unconsciousness, a kind of a parallel dimension, let's say, for me. And this is my way of exploring the space-time unconscious. On one side here, you're looking at these two images. They both represent galaxies. This painting is from the 17th century. And on the other side, one of the latest images from the James Webb Space Telescope. Probably most of you have seen these kind of paintings at the beginning and end of old books. In English, it's called marbled paper. But originally, this is a Turkish art invented in the 15th century in Afghanistan during this cultural flourishing that I was talking about. And we call it, also the Persians call it, clouded papers, not marbled papers. So when I dig deeper into this, I discovered that at that time, in the 15th century, people were talking about these papers, these clouds, as the clouds that our eyes cannot see, these were supposed to represent the distant parts of the universe. This is a time we still haven't invented the telescope, and we don't have a technological means to explore that, but we have the impulse, we have the effect to explore. So some artists imagined, and I just found this visual resemblance very striking. Yes, of course, Lynn.
So when he said he wanted to, we had a discussion privately before. So he showed me these slides, and I said, "Oh my God, this is, you know, the spiral, but the hope. Hope is the spiral. It's the openness. It's the not yet known, and then that thing is already there before we were here. We are here. It's in our imagination before the contemporary technologies were invented."
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's before we, and then the next image is a similar example. On one side, we are looking at the Jupiter's atmosphere seen through the lens of Juno, and on the other side, it's again from 15th century clouded paper. Yeah, and well, while at macrocosmic scale, we see this idea of the turbulence at the level of subatomic particles, we see the similar idea of the spiral appearing here. On one side, we are looking at a cloud chamber or bubble chamber where protons and electrons are just positrons and electrons are moving in turbulence. So these are particles that are coming from deep space and reaching our atmosphere and then creating these patterns. And on the other side, it is a contemporary, my own interpretation of this turbulence, the principle of the vortex and fluid dynamics. I want to show this one. Again, this is kind of mind-blowing for me. On one side, this is a 15th century mosaic in Persia, in Iran today. Look at the pattern here. The white tiles and the pattern that they build. For centuries, modern scientists thought that this pattern was impossible. Theoretically, mathematically, in physics, we thought that this was impossible to exist. Yet in 15th century in Iran, artists were able to imagine and actually turn it into an art form, cover the entire facade with that. So before techniques, before technology, before theory, this intuition, artistic intuition, and their generative form of art made it possible for them to explore the ocean of the unknown and come up with this pattern. It's called an forbidden symmetry. And on the other side, only 10, 20 years ago, we just discovered for the first time this pattern in nature on the molecular structure of a mineral we found on a meteorite. So the first proof of this was on an extraterrestrial mineral, never seen before. This is the final example of this entanglement, kind of. On one side, we are looking at a mosaic tile from Samarkand, and on the other side, it's a microchip. So this might appear to be decorative or geometric, but actually it's words and sacred words which are represented as circuits and meandering complex patterns. What's striking is, during that period, architecture was imagined as an information system, information media. In the literature, we talk about buildings that resemble manuscripts, walls that resemble pages. And we talk about every monument as an active information processing system because these are talismans. So it's not just representation. And I spent, before my PhD years, on these microchips. So one last striking part is they are made out of the same material. Silica, on one side, the silica tile is made from crushed quartz crystals. And this was so important for them because information for them could circulate through crystals. and to build virtual worlds. And then today, we are doing the same. We're taking quartz crystals, crushing them further, purifying them further, taking out the oxygen from silica, and giving us only silicon, and we create these silicon pathways. Yeah.
And then all the AI chips requires that material.
Yeah.
And that's what connects us, the art, the geography, the technology. The philosophical concept has not been changed throughout the centuries, but it's human intelligence that impulses that move us forward.
Exactly, yeah. So I think I can end with this, the presentation, but I will move to my...
This one needs to be moved, yeah.
Yeah. So these are, again, my explorations between two different fluid visions of the world, one computational, one artisanal. And at the end of this adventure of chasing clouds for 6 years, of course, I'm seeing clouds everywhere now, but it's kind of also true. For example, here, we're looking at, I took this diagram from a recent paper, across all fields, from astrophysics to biology, all the scientists today who wants to use the computational power to make new discoveries, they are navigating within clouds. For example, here you're looking at the scan of the scan of a mouse brain, and on the side of each brain, the same brain scan is represented as a colorful point cloud, which is predicted and analyzed by a machine learning model. So basically today, I suggest that the shape of thought, the cloud has become not just an infrastructure, but it is the shape of thought itself. It is by navigating within clouds that we are discovering knowledge, new ideas, new inspiration. And based on that, I made a my final project.
Before that, I want to say something. Actually, I find that the conversation you had last night on the dinner table more interesting about your sharing through your paper, Space-Time
wine,
Unconsciousness. Oh my God, sorry, we forgot the wine. We need the wine.
That's my fault.
Could you please recall that? The sharing through space-time unconsciousness, the collapse of atmosphere into the 3D reality, before we go to our play.
Well, maybe I can give us a little entry point there. There's something that you wrote, you wrote in, what was it in?
The Meteorology of Knowledge.
The Meteorology of Knowledge. That you write that you're looking at the visible traces of invisible forces.
Exactly. Yeah.
And in your practices of interpretation, I found such a kindred interest of thinking about kind of how that what we have these kind of enigmatic signals. And for me, when I interpret that, it's a sign of the unconscious, and you think of it differently. But you, in that particular article, you're talking about it as magic, as in not as dichotomous with science, but in fact very much entwined with it. And so I could see some similarities in our interest and practices around that idea of the visible traces of invisible forces.
Yeah. Well, many people are today talking about kind of magic, and I think magic is really a significant word today to understand what's going on, but it's not just supernatural. It's more about the change in perception, the difference in perception, the lack of knowledge, and for me, when I read your paper, my mind was blown. I didn't know we could talk about the same thing in so many different words. Yeah. And I think it's amazing that today we are discovering different forms of knowledge, different forms of cognition that are unique to us, that you are naming as unconscious, that I sometimes refer to as magical. Yeah.
So Thank you, everyone. So we have a last activity to do, but before that, I'd like to conclude the panel. So I'm going to say these things about the magic. So I think magic also happens on many different layers and levels. So I was able to experience some space-time traveling during my research because I'm a researcher in my research side. So, and then I also have other identities. So when I use one or the other, I actually experience the same space with the same people in front of me differently. It's like, oh my God, switch of the world. Like that moment really frustrated me, you know, in the beginning. But I just want to say that there are many different spaces, like even in this room, we come from different positionalities, you know, we have different cultural and social backgrounds. And then perspectives, it's really about shifting the perspectives. And that is what human geography is about today. And I was so happy that Muchun, you know, on their website and their journal, they really value and then put geography as a very important, as a departure point. And I said, I was so excited. I said to Ben, and I'm like, oh my God, like we have to, I really want to work with Ben. Can you please come to support me? And also said to Yuan, so thank you, Muchun, again. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Anna. And thank you, Mette, can you take us to the roller coaster now? Let's do like space-time travel together. You have to go to.
Yeah, I'll just go.
Oh yeah, scan this, please. Yeah.
So you can just scan this QR code. So this will be like the final creation that I made. I didn't want all the things, the subjects we talked about today to stay just in theory or writing. But how can we switch to...
You may need to add link the Wi-Fi here.
Can we switch to the... Yeah. Okay. So let's start this. Give me a second. So the website is called dreampixels.cloud. It's a platform that I developed, and for me, it represents the archive, the new idea of the archive in the age of AI, and it's kind of a more immersive way of exploring knowledge. And
sound. Let's put sound on.
Let's put the sound. So what you are seeing is actually 250,000 pixels selected from my works, creating a digital algorithmic atmosphere. And we click, we can explore my different projects, different works, about 20 different experiments I did during the past 6 years of my PhD research.
Why did you choose this map? Why did you choose this system? What makes the map?
Yeah,
what's the concept?
Actually, you are basically inside the mind of an AI that we today call the latent space. So when you teach something to AI and it comes up with all these predictions, we have this mathematical space, latent space. I refer to it as its mind, where we have all these possibilities, almost infinite. But this space is multidimensional. It's not in 3D. It has hundreds or thousands of dimensions. So to navigate in the mind of AI, we use algorithms that transform these hundreds of spaces and project it into 3D. So, and then scientists navigate in this cloud of possibilities and predictions. So I wanted everybody to have an experience of this.
You can go inside.
And we can go inside, of course, and then literally journey across these works and pixels. We can stop, actually. You can click on these pixels. Each pixel comes from a little image, for example, this one, and then you explore the project. So it's a new way of navigating knowledge, a much more where knowledge has become spatial, and data becomes a cloud. And there are also, of course, more conventional ways, like this, of course. Basically, it's different ways of engaging with knowledge that are much more spatial and through pixels, through colors, through data, rather than form, geometry, or taxonomy or classification. And the final mode is this one, through the different cities that I have been to, where each project takes place, for example, yeah. But I think this represents the hypothesis of the cloud age, a new way of understanding knowledge.
Thank you. So just to refer, because we just had panel discussions with Elise and Mette, and also two of the most important human geographers. And I want to say how I connected the symposium ideas. Historically, geographers, we were map makers. They travel and they make maps. And to borrow that idea, into artifact program, I think the question really is about how do we map our future? What questions should we ask? How do we map the humanity under existing uncertainty, the space of uncertainty and the unknown? And then what hope is doing today? It's not really about giving us a promising future, a clarity. It's not one solution. There are many. And then it's not on us to answer these questions, because we are all part of it. And then the future emerges from us and more than us. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.